Well, in the last lecture, we were discussing about population policies, and to recapitulate what we have discussed is that population policy is a statement which must be issued with the sign of the head of the state. Population policy may be about some specific aspect of population or more aspects of population. It can be about size, it can be about growth rate. So, some countries may feel that their growth rate is higher than it should be from development perspective, and therefore, it must be reduced. Some countries may feel that their growth rate is lower than what they would like to have or what is good for the development of the country, and it must be raised. Or some countries may have pronatal policy, means policy which encourages reproduction. Some countries may have antenatal policies which discourage reproduction. For example, European countries, most of them have pronatal policies. They want to increase their birth rate because their total fertility rate has already gone below 2, and in several countries it is close to 1.2 or 1.3, and they are facing the problem of population implosion, a possibility of negative growth rate, and the problem of aging of population, means rising median age of population. The policy may aim at encouraging or discouraging migration, or there may be policy regarding raising age of marriage or proportion unmarried in different age groups, or it may be something about social mobility. We have also seen that by and large the developed countries have pronatal policies and the less developed countries have antenatal policies, though several of countries of Latin America and Africa do not have an explicitly stated population policy, which may mean either they are happy with the present population trends, or there are only indirect ways, or there are statements by bureaucrats or different ministers in charges of different departments about good or bad effects of population. In developed countries, there are some other issues also like HIV/AIDS, human rights, rights of migrants, or rights of women and children, and specific policies to deal with the problem of trafficking of women and children. In less developed countries, the issue of HIV/AIDS is a new issue, and several countries of Latin America, Asia, Africa now have some policy regarding prevention of HIV/AIDS or fighting HIV/AIDS epidemic. Some of them must be more concerned. In Africa, there are countries where the prevalence rate of HIV has gone to the level of 24% among adults 15 plus. So, they are worried about HIV. They have also calculated what has been the loss in life expectancy due to this much of prevalence of HIV. Now, today, after discussing this, what is population policy, what are types of policies, we have also discussed a little bit about role of different leaders or sections of society in determining population policy. For example, I said that although population policies are statements by heads of states, but in determination of population policies, intellectuals, experts, consultants, academicians, civil society activists or NGOs, and religious leaders or women's groups have also played an important role. Today, we will see if it is possible to examine effectiveness of population policies. That we have a policy, India has a policy today, starting with a statement of policy in 1976 by Dr. Karan Singh, and then followed by Janta policy. We have National Population Policy 2000. Now, just having a policy is not enough. The policy must be effective, and therefore, there must be some ways of examining, exploring to what extent our policies are effective. Now, this is a difficult question. So, in today's lecture we will see what are all the considerations or what are all the complexities involved in examining effectiveness of population policies, be it a policy on fertility or marriage or migration or mortality. It has not been easy to evaluate effectiveness of policies. So, first let us define what do we mean by effectiveness. Since to implement population policy, a nation state has to spend resources, it is legitimate to ask whether policy is effective or not. In all 5-year plans, you have a certain amount of money earmarked for implementing family planning program or population policies. I think in the first 5-year plan, we started family planning program by putting a target of spending 65 lakh rupees on this, and then in the second plan the money rose significantly, and then in subsequent plans today we are spending crores of rupees in implementing our family planning program. We call it family welfare today. So, since we spend a large amount of money in implementing a population policy, obviously the policy makers would like to ask what has been the result of spending so much of money on the policy, because then you can compare effectiveness of spending money or resources on different kinds of policies, on say education policy, family planning policy. Somebody can ask whether it is worth spending so much of money on population policy. Why don't we spend more money on education? Why don't we stop family planning program and spend more money on education? Ultimately, we know that it is education or modernization or efficacy which is going to lead couples to limit family size. So, we need to know what is the effectiveness of policy, because we are spending money on that. Then in discussing effectiveness of population policies, the starting point is how does one define the effectiveness of policy. There are sometimes we make a distinction between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is kind of input output relationship, while effectiveness means more of output. What have we achieved? Effectiveness, what have we achieved? How many couples we have reached? How many villages? How many districts? How many states? And what proportion of different categories of population segments we have reached? How many people are using family planning methods? That is effectiveness. Efficiency means what have we achieved on per unit expenditure basis. So, we are talking about effectiveness. Here a simple definition of effectiveness may be that it is the degree to which a policy is able to achieve its desired objectives. The policy may be in the field of development, in the field of regional equality, or in the field of long term needs of society. So, in population policy, it means that by spending so much money in implementing population programs, what has been the result? There are certain prerequisites of effective population policy. How can we make our policies effective? Something which will also be required in exploring effectiveness of the policy. First, the policy must be stated in unambiguous and unequivocal terms. There must be clear goals, objectives, targets. Policy must be stated in unambiguous terms. That means if I have a policy to influence population growth rate, I cannot check the effectiveness. There will be some change in population growth. I must clearly state that the policy is about achieving a reduction in growth rate of population, and not only a reduction, but I must also say that I want to achieve a growth rate of this much in next 5 years, and then this much in next 10 years, then this much in next 15 years. We must have unambiguous and unequivocal population policy statement. So, like if you look at population policy of India, in the beginning the goals of population program were stated in terms of achieving birth rate of 25 as early as possible. At some point they started talking about achieving birth rate of 25 by a certain date. Then the policy was stated in terms of total fertility rate. At some point policy was stated in terms of net reproduction rate at the national level and then at the level of each state. And today we are talking more in terms of population stabilization, which is related to net reproduction rate, but we are talking, and recently we have also talking more specifically about infant mortality and maternal mortality ratios. Once we have clear statement, unambiguous statement of policy, then it is possible for us to check to what extent our policy has been effective. Then another prerequisite of effective policy is good governance. Gunnar Myrdal long back in his famous book Asian Drama said that the countries of Asia have a rather soft state. Soft state means the state is not able to achieve its own goals, what it wants to achieve, what it desires to achieve, what targets it fixes for itself, it is not able to achieve that, which relates to the degree of governance, transparency, corruption freeness, commitment, motivation, concentrated efforts. So, all that is required for good governance. Then strategies are based on good understanding of the socio-economic and cultural milieus. Based on my understanding of socio-economic and cultural milieu of India, I cannot have a policy that in next 5 years India must have the same life expectancy which Japan has today. Our life expectancy is say around 65 years. It is not feasible for us to have a life expectancy of 82 in 5 years time. So, policy must be our policy statements must be feasible statements. They should not be too ambitious or unrealistic. Then there is a good political support for the policy. If you have a policy in democratic society, sometimes this can happen that to show their face to United Nations or to group of nations like Millennium Development Goals, the state declares a policy, but because of multiplicity of interests of plural society, plural nature of society, they are not able to lend support, political support to its own program. For example, in our country, sometimes governments hesitate to lend full support to population policy due to fear of backlash among minorities. So, if there is a lack of political support, political commitment, then the policy cannot be effective. Then adequate resources are mobilized to implement the policy. We must have a correct calculation of how much resources are required to implement the policy. If you make suboptimal expenditures, you give money for construction of building to all PSCs, you give money to appoint doctors, you give money for vans or jeeps or vehicles, but you do not give money for petrol, or you do not give money for medicines. Or recently we were doing a study of HIV in Devas district of Madhya Pradesh. We came to know there was a common complaint among the providers at the district level, at STI clinic level, that from time to time they have been suffering from lack of testing kits and lack of medicines. If there is a lack of testing kits, then how can HIV policy be effective? People may come for HIV tests, they may be sent by NGOs or by TI partners, or some of them may come on their own, but you do not have equipment, or you do not have kit to test them, or you do not have medicine, you do not have a regular supply of ART, all your efforts are wasted. So, you must use the operations research methods to compute exactly how much and what type of resources are required, components of all the resources. Then socio-economic development and the population policy are influencing the targets in the same direction. That is also very important, because if this is not happening, then you are not able to achieve your objectives. That is the problem, as we will see later in some later slides, that is a problem that countries of Europe are facing today. Socio-economic developments are taking couples to decide to produce only one child or not to produce any child, but their policy is to raise fertility levels. So then the policy cannot be effective, because the policy is going in one direction, and socio-economic modernization and development, they are going in another direction. And lastly, that civil society is in agreement with the goals of the policy. So specifically, last time when I mentioned what is population policy, and I said that this is a statement issued with the signature of the head of the state. So it was clear that policy is always a state policy, but sometimes civil society may not see eye to eye with what the state policy is. Civil society may have its own views. If religious leaders, if civil society, if experts, consultants, media, thought leaders in the country do not agree with the state policy, then also achieving effectiveness will be difficult. There are some other difficulties too, like practical difficulties in assessing effectiveness of population policy. First, evaluation of population policy is problematic. The reason is that one cannot have an experimental method to evaluate the implementation of policy. In our sociology, the common research methods are survey, interviews, or ideally one can even think of experimental design, but we cannot have experimental design in a country like ours. You cannot, if you want to use experimental design to test effectiveness of policy, then it means dividing all the states into two groups, control and experimental, running one kind of policy in one group of states and running another kind of policy, or not running policy in the other group of states, and examining the effects of them after a gap of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. On political and ethical grounds, this control experimental thing is not possible in testing effectiveness of national policy. Just because sociologists want to use experimental design to test effectiveness of policy, the national government will not permit and cannot afford to have separate policies for separate states, or have policy for some states and not have policy for other states. So you cannot use your conventional experimental kind or comparative, Durkheim's comparative method. You cannot use comparative method in this sense. Then population trends depend on policy as well as on multitude of other factors, such as institutional context, economic conditions, culture, value of children. There are lots of researches on value of children by psychologists or by interdisciplinary teams of social psychologists. This issue, what is value of child or what are values of children, this in itself is a very complicated issue. Then religious doctrines and autonomy, etc. So population policy or efforts on the part of the state are just one part of all the things which affect the results, the fertility, the mortality, migration, social mobility, etc. If all of them go in the same direction, then obviously state policy will be effective. If economic condition, culture, they are not suitable, then the policy will not be effective. Actually, you cannot even have policy always. When we became independent, then the thought leaders or political leaders like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, they were all ardent supporters of population programs. But there was also a feeling among all the leaders, experts, political activists, political workers, grassroots workers, that we lack the institutional context of the West. We lack those economic conditions or culture in which population programs could be implemented. So we started very cautiously with Gandhian approach. People thought that the mention of population policy or population program will be taken as a very sensitive and irreligious or sinful thing to do. It was in 1951-52, the condition was not as it is today today we have come to that stage when we are saying that we must introduce sex education at 8th standard level among young adults, young adolescents, because of HIV and other issues. And in general there is a more favorable climate. Many parents also welcome if we introduce sex education directly or indirectly, even at the junior level. But in 1951, 1952, even the mention of words like population program, family planning were taken as something talking sinful, as something talking about sexuality or deviance or immorality or sensitive things, or things which should not be in public domain or which should not be discussed in presence of children and young adults. So in that climate we could not have a population policy, except that we said that we must control our population, and we advocated that celibacy or brahmacharya is the right method for that. So for example, how can one separate the effect of family planning program from the effect of modernization and development? This is a serious problem in examining effectiveness of policy. Then some major issues, lack of consensus regarding the major goals of the population policy, a problem which affects our policy even today. If you talk to 10 persons in Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, or if you talk to 10 experts, there is no clarity regarding what actually you want to achieve. Some people will focus on health, some on education, some on inclusive growth, some specifically on TFR or NRR, some on population stabilization. Then lack of adequate measurement of parameters of population system. This is another problem. Parameters, you may say that the parameters of population system are clear, fertility, mortality, etc. But how do you measure them? There is not one measure. Each of the components of population growth is measured in terms of several indicators, several measures. What is migration? Do you want to use census data, NSS data, or some other kind of data? Fertility, what do you measure in fertility? Birth rate or general fertility rate, or age specific fertility rates, or gross reproduction rate, or net reproduction rate? What do you, in what terms you want to evaluate your population policy? And you fix different measures of parameters of population system, you have different results. In terms of, like, if looked at from the perspective of couple protection rate, our achievements are enormous. More than 65% couples in India today are using family planning methods. So great, but in terms of reduction in growth rate of population, we have not been so successful. Even the last census produced a growth rate of more than 2%. So somebody from that perspective can say that we have not succeeded. Somebody from the perspective of couple protection rate can say that we have more than succeeded. Initially the goal was to reach 60% couple protection rate, because it was thought that once we reach 60% couple protection rate, we will have TFR of 2. But we have more than 60% couple protection rate, and our TFR is still quite high. Couple protection rate in the lagging states is also not so bad, but their total fertility rate is very high, 4, 4.5. So that depends on the measurement of parameters. Then lack of reliable data is another problem. Today gradually we are learning to collect reliable data on different aspects of population parameter, but we cannot say that we have reliable data on everything. We do not have, for example, we may have reliable data on birth rate. Our sample registration scheme data may be quite okay, but we do not have reliable data on maternal mortality ratio. So there are certain parameters on which we have reliable data. There are certain, we do not have reliable data on unemployment. There are many things on which we are still not able to produce reliable data. Some people may even doubt the validity of the figures of couple protection rate, because much of your couple protection is from female sterilization and cases of furgification, cooking up of data due to targets in the family planning program at grassroots level. Such things are reported very commonly. Then conversion of statistics of family planning users into reduction in total fertility rate. That is another big issue on which you require contributions from mathematicians, statisticians. That okay, you have achieved a couple protection rate of 65, which is not immediately reflected in birth rate impact. How many births are averted? One measurement in evaluation of population policies has been births averted, means how many births have been prevented from taking place. Births averted. That if you did not have family planning program, then you would have so many more births, and because of family planning program, so many births are averted. And you see this birth averted figure, you would like to know how many births are averted till say 2000, then 2001, 2002, 2010. What would be births averted in 2015, 2020, and how they cannot simply be added. Birth averted every year cannot simply be added, because they will have long term effect on reproduction, on number of women in reproductive period, number of men, number of women, and childbirths, etc.
So do you think this parameter can be measured, births averted?
Yeah, it's measured. We have to measure it to say that the family. The issue is that we spend money, resources. We spend resources on family planning. By spending resources on family planning, we increase the percentage of couples, percentage of married couples. In India, children are born only to married couples. Percentage of married couples using family planning methods, or what we call couple protection rate. Now, this couple protection rate must ultimately result in reduction in total fertility rate. And why does it result in reduction in total fertility rate? Because in between in number of births are averted. Because of this rise in couple protection rate, a number of births means if you had not used family planning methods, if your country had not used family planning methods, you would be producing many more births than you are producing today. That difference is births averted. Now, what I am saying that computing births averted from the figures of couple protection rate is a very complex exercise, because it depends on a number of factors. It depends on age distribution of population. It depends on usage of family planning methods, which methods are more in use, whether people are using condoms or they are using IUCD or oral pills or male sterilization or female sterilization, then age of acceptance of family planning methods for separate methods. Effectiveness, how effectiveness of different methods. Some methods may have 100% effectiveness, some methods may have lower effectiveness. Sterilization may be almost 100% effective, but condoms may not be 100% effective. Oral pills may not be 100% effective. So, there is some degree of effectiveness of each method. Then mortality data. Why mortality data? Because if a woman accepts sterilization at the age of 35, then it is not that because she has used female sterilization as a family planning method at the age of 35, then only next year some births will be averted. the advantage of her using female sterilization at 35 will be there for several years. If she had not gone for female sterilization, she may have produced a baby at 36, 37, 38, up to 49. So, effect of family planning method continues for a long time, and then it also depends on the continuation. Some people, this is a problem with spacing methods, which can be withdrawn, which can be used, withdrawn, reused. How long do people continue with family planning method? How long do they continue using oral pills or these methods? So, for establishing a relationship between this and this, so many things are required, and you require reliable data on each, you require statistical and mathematical models, then only you can have a clear understanding of how family planning statistics are producing results in terms of births averted, which will ultimately lead to reduction in total fertility rate. Then another issue is the lack of a clear theoretical understanding of population development nexus and how the effect of policy be separated from the effect of development and modernization. If we have achieved a couple protection rate of 65, is it due to family planning program of India, or is it due to development and modernization? Can one say that if India did not had family planning program, then the couple protection rate today would be 0? It would not be 0. Due to modernization and economic development on their own, in the Western countries there was no family planning program, and still for the reason of what we call social capillary, because they wanted to raise their own status and status of their children, despite opposition on the part of Catholic Church and often state, they went for family planning. In our country, we would certainly have some figure, may not be 65, but maybe 20 or 25. Even in absence of family planning program, we would have some couple protection rate. So, while you are evaluating the effect of policy, you cannot say that the whole 65% is due to that. Maybe if you can arrive at a figure like in absence of program, it would have been around 25, then 65 minus 25, the effect of program or policy is only 40, something like that. Then another problem is that in different countries, either due to paucity of funds or because the planners do not see an immediate gain of that, there is a lack of appreciation for monitoring and evaluation of population program. States think that it is enough that they have a policy, they have targets, and they instruct, they order their ministries or their administrators and their staff to work towards achievement of those targets. But there is no attempt to evaluate the efforts, or there is no mid-term or long-term evaluation. Monitoring and evaluation, usually monitoring is done when the program is going on, and evaluation when the program is completed. So, that is another problem. Lack of consensus regarding the major goals of population policy is a serious problem. Therefore, even those governments that now have an officially stated policy have taken decades to arrive at the policy statement and get it approved by appropriate state body. You see, we started our program in early 50s, but the first parliament approved formal policy document on population could be issued only in 2000, and that means at a gap of 50 years. It took 50 years for Indian Parliament to attain consensus. Government of India was by and large favorable to population control, but there was no consensus, and 50 years is a long time in the history of a country. So, lack of consensus regarding the major goals, everybody said that population must be controlled, but how? which method should be given more priority, what should be our communication policy, what should be direct and indirect methods, what should be the nature of organization of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, what should be the relationship between states and center, what should be the relationship between different departments, what is the role of different departments of government of India. These have been burning issues, and we have taken a very long time to decide about them. And then lack of data. If you do not have data, if you do not have data on continuation, you require specialized surveys. To collect data on continuation of practices, you require data. Now, this continuation would come mostly from spatial surveys. Age distribution will come from routinely collected official records and also from population census. Then usage of family planning method, various types of methods, from routine administrative statistics, from market research, from diverse sources. And the age of acceptance, surveys of acceptors will give you information about age distribution of acceptors of family planning methods. Effectiveness require specialized studies, sometime experimental control trials. And mortality data, you need life tables, and for making life tables you require age specific mortality rates, and these age specific mortality rates may come from effective vital registration system, or in our country they come from sample registration system. If we spend a little bit time on policy problems of less developed countries, we find that economically less developed countries are also statistically less developed countries in this respect. You do not have as good quality of data on all these parameters for less developed countries as you have for the developed country. Less developed countries lack detailed data on family planning and population parameters. The available data are often incomplete or unreliable. Then there are technical problems. How does one convert the data on number of users of family planning into measures of births averted and the percentage impact on the birth rate? That is another issue. First of all, converting couple protection rate into births averted, and then effect of births averted in different years on birth rate. So, if the ultimate goal is to reduce birth rate, how is it raising couple protection rate helping us in reducing birth rate? For evaluation of program, you need baseline data on age distribution and age specific fertility rates, data on pattern of mortality, reliable data on family planning users, all these parameters, rate of continuation, discontinuation, and effectiveness of different methods. To evaluate the effectiveness of population policy, the evaluators need a clear definition of whether the goal of the stated policy is to reduce population growth rate, which depends on three things: fertility, mortality, and migration, or fertility rate, or mortality rate, or all. So, so far what we have learned, that to evaluate the effectiveness of policy, we must have a clear definition of what the goals are. I have been repeating this. Garrett Hardin, he asked a question regarding policy. What is your policy? Do you want to reduce birth rate or do you want to reduce population size? He said that for development planning in those countries where population has already gone beyond the optimal level, there is a need to reduce population size. But if you are only reducing birth rate, then you are not reducing population size. Your population is still growing, maybe at a slower pace. And if during the time your birth rate is declining, death rate is also declining, or death rate is declining faster, then your population growth rate is increasing. So, you must be clear about what the goals of population policy are. The goals must be clear, measurable, and meaningful. Suppose the goal is to reduce fertility, then should the government aim at reducing birth rate or total fertility rate or other measures of fertility? A clear analysis is required to identify all factors on which the target indicators depend. Birth rate depends on age distribution. Net reproduction rate does not depend on age distribution. So, along with specifying the targets of the policy, there is also a need to identify all those social, economic, demographic factors on which your indicators depend. Like birth rate will also depend on population momentum. It is easier to reduce total fertility than birth rate, because birth rate depends on both age specific fertility rates and age distribution of population. It is not in the hands of planners to change the age distribution of population. Our state can make all best possible efforts to reduce age specific fertility rates, but it is not possible at all for the state to make changes in the age distribution of population. Effects of age distribution are going to remain there for several decades. Further, reducing the growth rate of population is still a more difficult task. As discussed previously, reduction in age specific fertility rate does not immediately reduce the growth rate of population, and for several decades population would continue to grow despite reduction in total fertility rate. That means, if India is to achieve total fertility rate of 2.1 next year, even then it will take 30-40 more years for India's population to become stationary or to get stabilized. Then there are other issues. Difficulty in analytical and empirical separation of the effects of policy from those of development and modernization. Qualitatively, issues are clear. The issue is to what extent reduction in birth rate is due to policy and to what extent due to changes in value system or changes in values of children or changes in literacy or education achievements or changes in levels of empowerment or changes in social development. But technically or empirically, it is not so easy to separate the effects of various types. Moreover, two processes may work in the same or different directions. In the developed countries, they are working in the different directions. In many less developed countries, they are working in the same direction. So, then if they are working in the same direction, then your estimates of achievements or effectiveness may be overstated. You may say that all the achievements in terms of aborted births or reduction in birth rate is due to population policy or family planning program, but actually that is because of both modernization, economic development, social development on the one hand and population policy on the other. Finally, a lack of appreciation for monitoring and evaluation of population programs is another issue. It is only now that Government of India gives on project basis projects to independent consultants for monitoring and evaluation. There is also pressure from international donors and international organizations. The program managers may not see the direct utility of evaluation studies at all. It also depends on how bright or committed the top ranking bureaucrats are. Some of us who have been involved in consultancy or developmental research have found that when a department is headed by a bright, committed, motivated, honest, independent bureaucrat at the top, then it takes monitoring and evaluation studies more seriously. And sometimes when this is not the case, then no evaluation study gets done. Because these studies too require expenditure of huge resources, and some people may think that why waste money on monitoring and evaluation, just spend all the money on running the program. And in absence of these studies, however, one cannot judge how effective the policy is. Often students ask a question whether developed countries are more effective in implementing population policy. There is no doubt that developed countries are worried about low fertility, particularly because it causes aging. It not only raises proportion of the old, but it also increases proportion of very old 80 plus among the old or 60 plus, means population of 80 plus divided by population of 60 plus, and this requires analysis of causes of fertility decline. The comparison between developed and developing countries in performance in implementing policies is not sound, however, because they are dealing with different types of problems. McDonald in 2006 said that there are several causes of low fertility in the developed countries. The major causes are social liberalism or reflective modernization, economic deregulation or the new capitalism. The former refers to the condition of postmodernism, postmodern family, postmodern orientation, postmodern attitudes, postmodern beliefs, postmodern political situation, postmodern family. And postmodernization coupled with organized capitalism with emphasis on region, certitude of science, industrialization caused the first demographic transition and fertility declined to 2 to 3. Now, reflexive modernization or postmodernization led to fulfillment of women's claims for gender equity, individualization of the individual and lifted the lid on divorce. Simultaneously, economic deregulation made a revolutionary impact on labor market. The end of jobs for life. You do not have jobs for life. India is also not untouched by this. Informalization of labor force in the last plan was only indicative of the fact that there are no jobs for life. There is more informalization and contractualization of work. So, leading to uncertainties in life and a desire among parents not to have so many children. Increased demand for higher level of human capital, flexible employment, contractualization of jobs, unemployment, uncertainties. These factors are more prevalent in the developed countries. Consequently, there the reflexive modernization produced the second demographic transition in which fertility went below the replacement level. And will the industrially advanced postmodern society, this is a question now, they will be able to have third transition and improve fertility levels through state intervention or community action? There is no simple answer. They are trying, they are trying to give all kinds of benefits. Even our country, which is facing the problem of population explosion, is giving so many facilities to central government employees for we have expanded maternity leave, we are giving paternity leave, even fathers are now entitled to certain days of leave when a child is born. We are saying that women employees can go up to 2 years of leave, 30 days, up to 2 years they can take leave to take care of their children. So, we have high fertility and at the same time we are following the Western model to facilitate childbirth. But we know that those who are, the other day I was saying high school pass, those who are high school pass and certainly those who are in government jobs, they are not willing to produce children. So, that is the situation in developed countries. Therefore, not compare India with Sweden or India with Denmark. One can compare India with Bangladesh because they have similar policies and similar socio-economic characteristics. Both are developing countries with low income, large rural base, strong influence of religion and tradition. Perhaps you cannot even compare India and China. They started with similar level of incomes, similar structural conditions, same percentage of population in urban areas, similar health infrastructure, the old traditional feudal belief systems, patriarchy, son preference, but we decided to go for a democratic plural country and China went for some kind of totalitarian communist ideology controlled society, and therefore we cannot compare. In China it is easy to implement a one child policy. In India as a state policy it is not possible for us to have that. India and Bangladesh can be compared, similar situation, antenatal policies means against fertility. One cannot compare effectiveness of policy between Mexico and France. In the two cases institutional mechanism and conditions are very different. It appears that with the end of value of children, it is impossible to raise fertility unless new institutional mechanisms are developed which virtually coerce women to reproduce children. So, maybe a time will come, if the present trends continue, that societies will have to curtail women's freedom or women's empowerment and use some kind of force. We do not know if incentives do not work. Society has to survive. If incentives do not work, then maybe some women can be withdrawn from labor force and coercion may be used. We are living in post-modern uncertain world and we do not know what will happen in the future. Merely giving them more facilities for producing children will not help. This is not helping. Any attempt to predict post-transitional fertility in the developed countries is in vain. It is more difficult to implement population policy in the developed countries than in the developing countries. I am saying this to convey the point that implementing policy has always been difficult. So, it is not that in India only we are facing the problem of not getting desired results in the field of population programs. This is so everywhere. Similar is the case even in the developed countries. Actually, they find it still more difficult to implement their policy than is the case in less developed countries, where modernization is favoring implementation of policy. Their post-modernization is contradicting with the aims of population policy. Yet there are some who see that it is possible, and for this society has to support family, particularly women. At the end, let me quote something from MacDonald. Let me read this thing. The solution to low fertility in the context of developed countries lies neither in the moral rights call for a rolling back of social liberalism, that is not possible, nor in the old left's agenda of rolling back economic deregulation. Both waves of change have achieved many of the desirable outcomes for which they were intended. Most people prefer to live in a society that offers social freedom and personal choices. Once people have tasted social freedom and choices, it is impossible to take them back. Most prefer to work in an environment that rewards enterprise and endeavor, but most people prefer to have long lasting intimate relationships and to have children. The solution therefore lies in a third wave of social change, new and substantial priority to the support of family life, especially the bearing and rearing of children. New perspectives on the family are required that recognize the vital social and personal significance of family life, and that understand that family life will be played out amid the social liberalism and the new capitalism that are integral to 21st century economies and society. To follow MacDonald, then the population policy in the developed postmodern societies, effectiveness would not be effective unless family life is supported. The population policy will not be effective unless family life is supported. This is clear that if you want to have effective policy, you cannot have direct policies, you have to support family. The question is how, and another issue is what will be its repercussions for the very institutions and values that have produced the weakening of family, the freedom and the individual choices. The developing countries have some other problems: lack of conceptual clarity, disagreement among the opinion makers, academics and planners, that is the biggest problem. But there are other problems too: fear of misuse of funds, lack of governance, religious or ethnic resistance, and transfer of responsibilities in the field of family planning and health to private sector, individuals or non-government organizations. This is a quote from Jain, that ICPD, International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD makes some very unrealistic demands on national governments. The implementation of a broader population policy as embedded in ICPD recommendations would require a cross-sectional approach to policy making. Experience in policy making with such an approach, however, has not been promising so far, either in the population field or in other fields. At least 6 factors would hamper implementation of such an approach in any setting. The extent to which these issues are resolved would determine the degree to which a broader policy is implemented in a country and succeeds in reducing growth and improving individual well-being. The factors are lack of conceptual clarity, disagreement among academics and intellectuals, concern about losing funds for family planning, absence of effective bureaucratic structures, lack of effective accountability mechanism, and waning role of government. I think this quote from Jain also summarizes what I have tried to say today. So, what are the lessons for India? If we want to have an effective policy, first of all we must be clear about the goals of the policy, we must have right kind of commitment, we must have intersectoral or interdepartmental coordination. We should also encourage family planning as well as beyond family planning factors like raising age of marriage, social development, empowerment of women, etc., etc., so that the goals of policy can be achieved. There are complex issues in judging effectiveness of policy. If there is any question.
So, just a small clarification, should media be propagating family planning policies, these policies?
You see, right from the beginning, we have used a multimedia approach in family planning, which means interpersonal communication, change agents or extension workers going to the people, talking to them face to face. In certain kinds of things that helps, but we have also involved jatras, folk media and also mass media. So, radios, TV, newspaper and wall writings, posters, pamphlet, leaflets, books, slogans. India's approach has been to use all kinds of media, informal, formal and mass media and everything, traditional media, mass media in implementing population program.
Thank you, sir.
For certain purposes, interpersonal communication helps, and for making people aware, mass media helps more. But for taking decision, for helping couples to take decision, face to face or interpersonal communication can affect more. And this interpersonal communication is usually done through ANMs, Anganwadi workers, these days Ashas. So that is the way, grassroots level workers. Thank you.